Wait, what? Have you ever wondered why God was so harsh with Moses? I mean, one mistake after everything that he did, leading Israel out of Egypt, parting Red Sea, and one mistake and he can't enter the promised land? I don't know about you, but to me that seems a little bit unfair, right? But this wasn't just about Moses. What if God was telling a much bigger story? One that's actually about you and me. See, here's something crazy. It's very well known that Moses represented the law and Elijah represented the prophets. Moses representing the law meant he represented the system of trying to be good enough, the system of the commandments and the rules. And guess what? The law couldn't bring people into the promised land. But you know what did? Joshua. And here's where it gets wild. Joshua's Hebrew name is Yeshua. That's the same name as Jesus. And what does that name Yeshua mean? It means the Lord saves. God was painting a picture. The law can only take us so far, but Yeshua, only Jesus, can save and bring you into the promise. So what did Moses actually even do? Why was it such a big deal? How was it foreshadowing something greater? Well, the first time, God tells Moses to strike the rock, and water comes out. That's in Exodus. But later, in Numbers, God says, just speak to the rock. But Moses, he strikes it again. And that might not sound like a big deal, but it actually breaks this whole picture and foreshadowing because that rock is supposed to be representing Jesus. In 1 Corinthians 10:4, it says they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. When Moses struck the rock, it was this picture of Jesus being struck once, crucified for us, but after that, we don't get salvation by hitting the rock again, by striving harder and working harder. We receive it by faith, by speaking and trusting. Moses' mistake was more than just disobedience. It was trying to do things his way instead of trusting in God's way and God's salvation. And that is why he couldn't enter. Because the promised land wasn't for people who get there by their own effort and goodness. It was for people who get there by trusting in God and his ability to save. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this not from yourself. It is the gift of God, not from works, so that no one can boast. Ephesians 2:8 and 9. So Joshua has the same name as Jesus, but is that the only foreshadow? No, there's actually a ton. One of my favorites is in Joshua 10, when Joshua leads the people in, he faces these 5 kings, these 5 enemy kings, and he defeats them. He traps them in a cage. And what does he do? He rolls a stone over the entrance. Later, he rolls the stone away, brings the kings out, and crushes them underfoot. That's so weird. Does that sound familiar? A stone rolled over a cave and then rolled away again? Fast forward to Jesus. He's buried in a tomb, sealed with a stone. But on the 3rd day, that stone is rolled away. He comes out and he crushes, has victory over sin and death and all of the enemies. Here's something else that's wild. Like, why the number 5? Why 5 kings? Well, the number 5 in the Bible represents grace. Some examples are the 5 offerings in Leviticus, burnt grain, peace, sin, guilt, all point to Jesus' sacrifice of grace. David defeating Goliath with 5 stones, grace overcoming the enemy. Jesus feeding the 5,000 with 5 loaves is grace providing supernaturally. The 5th wound of Jesus, his pierced side, is grace poured out in his blood and water. And Joshua's victory over the 5 kings. Jesus conquering sin by grace, not by works. From beginning to end, God is showing us that salvation is never about human effort. It's always been about his grace. So maybe the real question isn't, why couldn't Moses enter, but why are we making the same mistake? Are we still trying to get in by effort, by proving ourselves, by striking the rock over and over? Or do we trust that Jesus has already done it? We think our good work should be enough to save us. We think our lack of trust in God shouldn't be a big enough deal to keep us out. But isn't that exactly what we see with Moses? We think God was being unfair to Moses, but was he? Or was he just showing us that salvation was never about what we can do? It's about trusting in what he has already done. Because the law can't bring us in, only Jesus can. God wasn't being unfair. He was setting up a story that is still playing out in us. The law leads us to the promise, but only Jesus gets us in. So which way are you trying to enter?